Hi there, C.Note here. I wanted to, first of all, make reference to the last video I posted. I talked all about what my sort of emerging vision is for doing this mental wellness work. And you can get a little bit more detail about what's going on there. I talk about this kind of four-quadrant idea of interior individual, exterior collective, and interior collective, and helping people find sort of direction and purpose through an interconnected affiliate and referral web of like coaches, consultants, mentors, therapists, and personality profilers and personality trained coaches. And so I didn't really talk about what I offer. And part of what I would like to offer is, yes, being a junction box to be able to point people in those directions. But the people who would come to me are those who are diagnostically stuck. Like there's this stuckness in your life. You don't have a certain sense of direction, or maybe no permission to leave a space or leave a situation or leave a job or leave a marriage, or trying to fine tune like how to calibrate those situations from an individual level. Like, what is going on with my thinking? Maybe you're dealing with internal confusions and you have a lot of fits and starts, right? Like, not really sure where to go next, or you have like a sudden confidence and then a pullback. I deal with that all the time, and it's a real challenge to find clear direction, what to even try and do, because I recognize myself getting very much caught up in the shoulds of it all. Like, what should I do next? Like, as if there's a absolute correct answer that I need to get into and do the next thing, right? You might hear the bells in the background of the church. That's pretty much right there. That's the signaling that it is noon. And I should have known better when I started recording this, but I'm going to keep going. So enjoy some bells in the background if you can hear it. And it's going to distract me. but that's the main idea. If you're dealing with some confusions and some fits and starts and not really sure where to go next, there's kind of two directions of working with me. One is literally doing personality profiling, where I will ask you questions, interview you, and we will figure out your Myers-Briggs personality type and sort of share some insights. You validate through this interview whether or not the information resonates with you. So it's not me telling you your personality type, it's you reflecting back to me, yes, that resonates, no, that doesn't resonate, and then we fine tune and calibrate and try to find what does resonate. And then from there, I do an explanation, which is being able to provide a little bit more depth material and insight into understanding the codified nature of personality types, so you can have reference points in your mind. And so if that's like a direction you want to go in, that's something we can do together. Just send me a message and we can figure out how to start working together around that. And then the other side is like not needing to go down the personality route. Like I have an interdependence with personality types that I can reference it in my own mind, but I don't need to like teach you it, right? And that's not the thing. I'm not teaching you personality types. It's just a personal reference point, or using it as a personal reference point. So, we could just jump into a diagnostic session, basically, of telling me a little bit about your story, telling me where you are, telling me what your thought processes are, what you're stuck in, what you're looping around. And then I can help you, kind of suss out where the stuck point is, and then, try some things to go forward. And the stuck point could be multiple things. It could be like a false dichotomy in our own thinking. It could be something related to a person who's maybe influencing our thinking, our culture. It could be something related to maybe a lie we keep telling ourselves, or a story we keep telling ourselves that's not true, and that we just keep believing because it maybe keeps us in a certain place. Like, we can have secondary benefits from feeling small or feeling less than, or having an overt relationship with being negative or overly positive, and not getting to a core issue, which is maybe needing to feel our pain and our emotions, or needing to actually feel a sense of optimism so that you can go forward into the unknown. Which gets into the topic I think I want to talk about a little bit more in depth here. So now that you have a sense of what it is that I offer personally, send me a message if that clicks with you and that's something you want to get started on. I want to talk about fear, blame, shame, and guilt. I think these are four areas. four areas that I think are really important focus points for us to be aware of and calibrate. Like, what are we afraid of? What are we casting blame around? What are we feeling shame or creating shame around? And what are we feeling guilt or creating guilt around, right? There's this internal external relationship, this in and out relationship with, I think, all four of those: fear, blame, shame, and guilt. And I think fear is probably the most visceral and obvious for most people. Fear is often future based, and it's often about the unknown. It's about our imagination. It's trying to discern what's coming. It's trying to figure out and have varying degrees of certainty about what's coming. Some people are more comfortable with uncertainty. Some are very much less comfortable with uncertainty. And you think about the obvious things, being afraid of the dark. When you're a kid, when you're on your bed, you don't know what's under your bed, right? Even though maybe you've looked under there and you know that there's things under there, when you're in the dark in a different context, you just don't have the theory of mind, or you don't have the mental capacity, the person perspective to trust and know that there's literally physically could not be anything under the bed. But your imagination runs wild. And throughout our own human development, our imagination runs wild for various reasons all the time. Some of the latest big picture things we see is like climate change. That's a big esoteric thing. Like, there are physical, tangible provings to various aspects of it, but it's also something that the holistic network of it all is really difficult for the mind to grasp, right? The same thing with like money and like blaming of billionaires, for example, for the world's problems. It's really difficult for our individual mind to understand and grasp the various specific systems of the world that are happening, right? We can have a sense of maybe what other people are doing, or have a sense of disparate ideas, but it is a challenge to really fully know the scope and context of what's going on. There are limitations in what we can know, and so therefore what we don't know is potentially a scary thing, because it could have a detrimental it could be detrimental to our survival, right? And that's ultimately what fear comes down to. Is like, if we didn't fear for our lives, for continuing to be conscious and to be alive, then we wouldn't have fear. We would have no reason for fear. There are certain fears that come online at various developmental levels, but fear is something that is an ever-evolving process along with our development and our understanding of ourselves and our consciousness. So fear is something that is, it's complicated. It's not as simple as just like eliminating the fear, right? There are some personality types in the Enneagram. There's one in particular that I'm thinking of that tries to ignore its fear and just push through. And, the only way that you can't really ever eliminate fear, but you can have more rational fears, or you can have more appropriate fears. I think one of the challenges we're dealing with today also is just this awareness, which is both a perk and a challenge, is this awareness of the world's happenings, this awareness of seeing more and more images of war and terror and atrocities that go on around the world, and news stories and things about different laws and things like that, right, that affect people, that really do actually affect people. And I say it's a feature and a bug because ever since like the Vietnam War were the first time we were really seeing images of war more regularly on TV, like the average person. You'd get letters and hear stories of war in like the Civil War and back in the day. We read things in history books and see imagery and paintings and things like that, but now we're seeing like high resolution, real time happenings. And through that, we are it's creating a certain type of fear that could happen on our doorstep, but it also creates awareness of the realities of what's happening, so that we as a collective consciousness can eventually make adjustments and figure out how to uh, care about that as a human organism and do something about that, for better or worse. Like it's a whole back and forth challenge, right? And the thing is that like even me talking about that stuff, it's big and it's esoteric, even though it's real in the moment that we see those things. If I'm laying in bed and I'm like imagining replaying those images or imagining what could be happening in the world right now while I'm laying in bed or while I'm eating ice cream or not, hopefully not doing both at the same time. Um, uh, while I'm imagining these things in my own mind, these are not real things that are happening that I'm actually aware of, or real things that are in my immediate sphere, right? That's not to promote ignorance, but that's to say that presence is often an antidote to manufactured fear, right? And by manufactured, I mean exaggerated fear, right? It may not be, again, that those things aren't real, but the scope and scale of what's actually happening, like visceral fear of being that person in that situation, I would say is a much more valuable fear than someone who's abstractly fearful of what's happening on the other side of the world. Does that make sense? So it's like, it's not admonishing fear, because you need fear to be brave to go forward. That's where bravery comes from, is this idea that you you are aware of your fear and you go forward anyway. It's about courage, right? So some of the courage comes from, yes, there are these abstract fears and these actual things that are happening in the world, but how do we find the will and the strength to go forward anyway, right? Uh, that's person to person. I can't give you that answer because that's going to be based on you and your relationship to fear, right? So I know that like these videos or things that you see on the internet all the time where someone's trying to give you the answer to this sort of thing, I can't really give you the answer because it depends on your relationship to fear. And it's going to be a cop-out because it's the same thing with blame, shame, and guilt. It's all about your story, your relationship, your coding, your understanding, your thought process around fear, blame, shame, and guilt, right? So to move this along, talking about blame, blame is another one of those things that I feel like is a lifetime to learn that blame doesn't actually do anything. Blame is just outsourcing responsibility. Blame is saying that like, it wasn't me, somebody else did it, right? It's simply put, right? Or I have nothing to do with that whatsoever. And blaming someone or blaming something, it's often blaming something, right? For our circumstances, for our situation. And blame may not be necessarily completely false, right? Blame might not be that what you're saying is untrue, or you're making up stories, or you're making up excuses. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, blame is a problem. Blame is a challenge because it can be something that tries to, again, devoid us of responsibility of our next steps for our life, for what we're doing next. It's like blame can almost be a mechanism for saying, you need to atone for this, you need to fix this, you need to fix my life, you caused problems in my life, so you need to be the one to sacrifice yourself, or you need to admonish yourself, or you need to suffer or be punished, or something that allows me to feel like I can go forward. And no matter what happens in the outside world, it's always about you and finding your way to find the way forward. Whether that's changing your environment, changing your culture, changing a perspective, or finding your path through the situation, setting new boundaries, or whatever the case may be. Right? If someone's hurt you, setting a boundary is valid, right? As opposed to trying to change their thinking, trying to change their ways, trying to change an entire culture to form around you, or to try to change an institution to form around you, or to try to change your partner so that they are catering to you instead of, finding a new balance point. And that's what I think is the tricky thing around blame. Blame can be often holding us back a lot more than we realize, right? And blame can feel good. Blame can feel like cathartic. Blame can feel like it's something that we have, like we can feel a vindication around it. We can get chemical hits around, blaming someone, because blaming someone almost feels like finding the reason or finding a leverage point or finding a feeling that matches something. It's like putting two blocks together and it's like, oh, this matches this. And so there's a certain kind of chemical excitement that comes from being able to blame someone and say like, oh, it was my parents. Oh, it was their generation. Oh, it was the corporate thing, or it was, this political leader, or it was my ex-wife or my ex-husband or my current partner or my kids or whoever, whatever. It's like there's a chemical hit and kind of an excitement of being able to say, oh, I know what it is. Even though that can be true in terms of what it is, now the action still falls on you of what the next step is. So it's assumed that the blame or diagnosing like the external thing means that your life is suddenly going to get easier, or that if you're beating up on that person and blaming them or shaming them, that suddenly it starts to fix things. And blame usually does lead to shame. It's shame is kind of an emotional tool. It's sort of a way of getting someone off of their rhythm, and shame can be a way of ostracizing someone culturally, or it can make someone trying to make someone feel a certain feeling, right? And in a way, it's like trying to rob someone of their sovereignty, so that they can course correct, based on your perception of what they need to course correct, right? So, shame is interesting because shame has some some interesting evolutionary validity, right? If there's someone who is like a child predator in the neighborhood, like shaming them is a valid way of like outcasting them, right? It's a way of like everyone in the neighborhood knowing about their tendencies and their behaviors and, eliminating the threat, so to speak. So that's a very kind of ancient method of doing that we still very much carry today. The idea of canceling, which, I haven't really heard talked about in a little while, but it was a really hot topic for a little bit of time there, that it was like this kind of social shaming, casting out based on behaviors that are no longer becoming sweepable under the rug in terms of the collective consciousness. So, shame has its power, but shame can also be abused. Shame can be something that a single person decides that this is not acceptable, and it becomes something, again, related to like abstract ideas versus something someone actually did, or something that's provable, or something that whatever, and it becomes something that becomes a weapon. It becomes something that, just like any weapon, can be used to, or any tool, I should say, that can be used to weaponize or to build, right? So shame, believe it or not, can be a tool to build, and make sure that we kind of build antibodies to systems, to collectives, but also shame on an individual level can very much keep us from feeling like we can move forward. We can feel shame for something that is totally fine on a cultural level or for ourselves, in terms of getting in the way of self-acceptance and getting to a place where, we really feel like we felt like we were a bad person because someone shamed us. And it could be just for like the way that we think relative to maybe how our parents thought. That's where like kind of the personality type stuff comes in a little bit. You have a parent that thinks a certain way, and then the child thinks a different way. They're at opposition with each other, or they don't understand each other, or one is completely unknown to the other. One is like manipulatable where the other one isn't, not only just in the parent-child dynamic, but you could certainly have that in a same age relationship. where there's a certain way of thinking that the other person just doesn't have attunement to, and makes them susceptible to that area of thinking. And and in that, you know, can if you're someone who's very willing and desires to connect with that person, you can very much try to mold yourself to that person. It makes more obvious sense with a parent-child relationship. The child is going to abandon themselves to satisfy the needs of the parents because they are dependent on the parent. And so that carries on to our adulthood for a lot of us, and we're often unraveling, these shame spirals that we can get into around our way of thinking or way of being, or maybe like over the course of our lives, like a couple of acts that we committed are that are reasonably forgivable, and things that we actually all kind of various people do go through. And shame is shame is often healed by getting a sense that, like, I'm not the only one person that's ever felt this or done this, and there are other people who have worked through it, and getting a sense that, like, I'm not this, like, heathen, right? I'm just a person, and I make mistakes, and there's a self-acceptance that comes from that. And then being able to own and accept who I am or who we are, and then make that adjustment to start to embody and live, by our own, live and die by our own sword, so to speak. And then the last one to kind of bring this home, because this is getting a little long, but it's about guilt. And guilt can come as a result of shame or being shamed, and usually maybe some actions we've taken, or a way that we previously used to think relative to how we're thinking now. This happens for a lot of people when they get into a religion. If you get into a religion at a young age, it's like, it could be just having been a reckless teenager, and then you sort of now become civilized, quote unquote, and are a person that is starting to atone for those behaviors. And there's a lot of guilt that comes from that. Again, it's very similar to shame. Guilt can have an actually, there's a healthy mechanism to it, because it sort of focuses in that sort of independent childhood recklessness into contribution into society. That's how civilizations are built at a larger scale. If everyone has this voice in their head, whether that's God or society's voice in some sort of way, like whatever the written rules of society are, the unwritten rules also, we abide by those by self-reinforcing through guilt. So that guilt keeps us in line for a period of time. The challenge then becomes unraveling that guilt when we no longer need it. We do need it at some point. If you were a drug addicted person, or you're dealing with some sort of uncontrollable whatever, and then you needed to be sort of honed in, then you go through later stages of life where you're like, I actually, like, guilt is becoming an impediment to my growth now. I keep feeling guilty about things that are not relevant to me anymore. I keep feeling guilty about asserting myself. I keep feeling guilty about expressing myself. I'm feeling guilty about having a person with, like, sexual urges, or a person that desires a certain level of personal commitment. Or maybe it's a relationship to money. It's like, actually, I like making money. I like owning a business. I like whatever. And what you went through discouraged that. And so you need to, repair your relationship with money. That might be a letting go of guilt kind of relationship. I have an interesting relationship with guilt personally, because I feel like I repressed a lot of it. I feel like guilt became an unconscious thing for me, where I just allowed myself to do a lot of things that I could easily just talk myself into allowing myself to not feel guilty. And so guilt has been more of a recent thing that I'm processing more. I'm writing in my journal, and I'm expressing guilt. And the thing is, when you feel guilt and have done something that you feel like you need to be forgiven for or atone for in some sort of way, it doesn't necessarily have to be about this sort of movie like sit down with a person and confessing everything and getting forgiveness from another person, because you can continue to try to get forgiveness from other people, and it doesn't really matter until you forgive yourself. And forgiving yourself is another form of acceptance, and that's part of this whole, process. You could say that fear, blame, shame, and guilt are kind of a process, but it's really an ongoing check-in of where am I at with these various topics. What am I thinking about? Who am I blaming? What am I afraid of? Who am I shaming, or who is shaming me? What do I feel shameful about? And what do I feel guilty about? And who am I trying to make others feel guilty about? My children, or my parents. A lot of people my age are really trying to make our parents feel guilty about the way that they grew up, or the way that they raised us, or the way that they the education system, or anything like that. There's a lot of blame, shame, guilt, and fear that all comes through this package of abstraction that is keeping us, disconnected. It's making us feel lonely. It's making us feel like we're not. All of this imagining is making us feel like we actually know people, and we don't. That includes ourselves. We don't really fully know ourselves, because these elements are kind of in our way. And so if we're willing to get to know ourselves, then I think we're willing to start to get to know people, and get to know what their actual experiences are, not our made up assumptive beliefs about them. That, for example, for me, it's like, if I say things like, I don't think the world is broken. I don't think that climate change is going to be as severe as like people's imaginings are. It's not going to be this like world on fire kind of thing, but there will be absolutely changes. And I don't think we should be blaming our parents for our problems. And I can go on a list of all of the things. And, I get accused of being a certain political party, or I get accused of having a certain type of thinking, or someone in their mind puts me in a box. Right? And that's the thing. We're already putting ourselves in boxes. We're putting other people in boxes. And by making all of these assumptions all the time, we're feeling lonely. We're feeling disconnected. We're making ourselves stuck. And so many people are feeling stuck. And you feel this restlessness in the world. You see it big picture with literally armies trying to move to different parts of the world to try to create a better situation for themselves by being dissatisfied, to again the abstractions of how we're feeling kind of politically, and how we want the world to be versus where we are now. It's there's so many assumptions going on, which is all based on fear, and it's all based on trying to define a purpose for ourselves. Because for a lot of us, it's not as obvious as it used to be. So, that's part of what I hope I can offer you, because I can't do anything about the big picture world stuff. I don't have that capacity. But if you're listening and this is interesting to you, and you're like, oh, I have this specific situation that kind of resonates, but I don't have an exact answer, maybe you can help me. Send me a message. Let's talk. Again, one of two avenues. We can do the personality profiling session, and we can get a little bit more literal using personality type language, and I can help you with that using the codified language. Or we can just do, and then we can do a diagnostic session. Or we can just do the diagnostic session where we can, you can tell me your story, you can tell me what's going on, and we can try to suss out, some tweaks of perspective, or values, or direction, sense of purpose, or even gratitude, and practices and connection to ourselves and the moments that can make things way better for ourselves. So I appreciate you for listening. I'm C.Note. Just send me a message if you're interested, and I'll talk to you next time. See ya.